My life unraveled in a way I could never have anticipated, a slow unraveling that began with a single thread pulled loose by my own hand. A choice I made impulsively, recklessly, that crept into my existence like a thief in the night and stole everything I once held dear. It started with an affair, a decision that, at the time, felt like a lifeline, a way to breathe again, but in the end, it shattered the love and trust one had built with my husband, Taryn, over years of what I thought was a solid marriage. I remember how it used to be with Taryn. At first glance, we had the kind of life people envied, a perfect little family, complete with our son, Timothy, who was the light of our world. We'd sit together on quiet evenings, the three of us sprawled across the living room couch, talking about the future with a kind of naive optimism that only comes when you think you've got all figured out. I'd imagine the adventures we'd take. Weekend camping trips, vacations to the coast, watching Timothy grow into the man we'd raise him to be. Those were the days when laughter came easily, when Taryn's hand in mine felt like an anchor and the world seemed full of possibility. But time has a way of wearing things down, doesn't it? As the years slipped by, the pressures of life started piling up like bricks on our shoulders. Money was tight, always tight, and the bills kept coming faster than we could pay them. The vibrant colors of our relationship, the ones that used to paint our days with joy, faded into a dull, gray routine. We weren't living anymore. We were just existing, going through the motions like actors in a play we'd rehearsed too many times. Resentment grew in the cracks of our silence, a quiet poison that seeped into every corner of our home. The arguments started small, little jabs about forgotten chores or unpaid bills, but they grew sharper, more frequent, each one a reminder of the distance stretching between us. I began to see Taryn as controlling, his every suggestion feeling like a chain tightening around my spirit. He'd tell me I was spending too much time out with friends, or that I needed to focus more on Timothy, and I'd snap back, accusing him of trying to cage me. Meanwhile, I became suspicious, paranoid even, convinced he was hiding something from me. I'd sneak glances at his phone when he wasn't looking, scrolling through his messages for evidence of betrayal that didn't exist. Ironic, considering I was the one about to cross that line. My heart was restless, aching for something I couldn't name, a void I didn't know how to fill. That's when Adrian came back into my life. He was an old flame from years ago, someone I'd known before Taryn, before Timothy, before the weight of responsibility had settled on me. We reconnected by chance. A casual message on social media that turned into coffee, then playdates with our kids as an excuse to see each other. At first, it felt innocent, like rediscovering a piece of myself I'd forgotten. Adrian had this way of making me laugh, of lighting up the parts of me that had gone dark. With him, I wasn't just a wife or a mother. I was me again, the version of myself I'd buried under years of monotony. But innocence doesn't last, does it? Those playdates turned into something more, something forbidden. It started with a lingering glance, a brush of hands that sent a jolt through me, and before I knew it, I was falling into an affair. With Adrian, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The secrecy, the stolen moments, it was exhilarating, like shedding a heavy cloak I'd been dragging around for too long. We'd meet in hidden corners of the city at parks or quiet cafes, laughing over shared memories and dreaming about a life that could never be. For a fleeting moment, I convinced myself I could have this spark, this freedom, and still keep everything else intact. To make it work, I built a web of lies so intricate I almost believed them myself. I told Taryn I was joining a book club, that I'd made new friends who liked to meet up for drinks or late-night chats. I'd come home with stories about people who didn't exist, weaving a fake social life to cover my tracks. I'd kiss Timothy goodnight with a smile, pretending everything was fine, while my mind raced with thoughts of Adrian. I told myself it was harmless, that I deserved this little escape, that no one would get hurt. I was living in a fantasy, blind to the storm brewing on the horizon. That storm broke one afternoon when Taryn came home early. I'd been careless, too caught up in the thrill to notice the cracks in my carefully constructed lies. I was in the kitchen, texting Adrian about meeting later, when the front door opened. Taryn stood there, his face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into rage as he saw the guilt written all over me. I tried to stammer out an excuse, but the truth spilled out in fragments, enough for him to piece it together. He demanded to know who it was, and before I could stop myself, Adrian's name slipped from my lips. The confrontation that followed was a nightmare I'll never forget. Taryn tracked Adrian down. I don't even know how, and the two of them clashed in a violent, chaotic mess outside our house. I stood frozen, watching as fists flew and shouts echoed to the neighborhood, the reality of my betrayal crashing down around me. Neighbors peeked through curtains, and Timothy's small, terrified face appeared at the window, his eyes wide with questions I couldn't answer. In that moment, I felt numb, detached, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. When the dust settled, the consequences came fast and hard. Taryn filed for divorce the next week, citing my infidelity as a reason, and I didn't fight it. I couldn't. The courtroom was cold, sterile, a stark contrast to the fiery mess I'd made of our lives. I lost primary custody of Timothy, a blow that cut deeper than anything else. The judge's words were a blur, but the look on Taryn's face, betrayal hardened into resolve, stayed with me. My friends, the ones I'd lied to for months, turned their backs one by one, unable to reconcile the woman they'd known with the stranger I'd become. I was alone, isolated in a way I'd never imagined, surrounded by the wreckage of my own making. Timothy suffered the most, and that's the part that haunts me. He was only 6, too young to understand why his world had flipped upside down. I'd pick him up on my visitation days, and he'd sit quietly in the car, staring out the window, asking things like, "Why don't you live with us anymore, Mommy?" or "Did I do something wrong?" Each question was a dagger, twisting deeper into my guilt. I'd fumble for answers, try to explain without explaining. But how do you tell a child that his mother broke everything because she couldn't control herself? I'd hug him tight, whispering that I loved him, but the words fell hollow against the pain I'd caused. Sitting alone now, in the quiet of my small apartment, I wrestle with the enormity of what I've done. The regret is suffocating. Regret for Taryn, for marriage I threw away, but most of all for Timothy, who deserves so much better than the scars I've left on his young heart. I failed him, failed us all, in a way that's impossible to undo. And yet, as I sift through the ashes of my choices, I can't ignore the troubling truth staring back at me. That impulsive streak, that hunger for something more, has always been part of who I am. Even now, with everything in ruins, I feel its pull, a whisper tempting me to run, to chase the next thrill, to escape the weight of my remorse. I don't know if I can change. I want to, for Timothy's sake, for my own, but the ghosts of my past choices linger, their voices loud in the silence. I'm left wondering if I'll ever outrun them, or if I'm doomed to repeat the same mistakes, chasing fleeting highs until there's nothing left to lose.